Greetings to you, Divesh, and then, of course, fellow listeners, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Comesa Radio Worldwide, the mind, the journey to destiny. We apply our mind to the journey that takes us to our destiny. My name is Sam Zimmer. I'm joined in the studio by Divesh Motilal. This is our Tuesday series wherein we look at the various units and conduct. And today we're going to look at conduct number 12, unit number 12 and conduct number 7. Am I right, Divesh?
That's correct, sir.
And here we are looking at leading the conversation. And this is a continuation of the conversation of yesterday at the trainer session. We are an African online radio station with a global reach, streaming live here from Johannesburg in South Africa to the whole world. We follow the principle called the idea. We inform and entertain, develop and educate, empower and support, associate and network. That's the idea. Yes, Divash, this topic, leading the show, sounds very simplistic, but if you recall our conversation yesterday, we emphasized on the importance of the host or the anchor of the show allowing transformation in themselves so that they can become authentic in holding the space. I like the term holding the space. Over to you. Greet the listeners, check in and perhaps reflect on that first point that was really for me a takeaway from yesterday's session at the Train the Trainer session. Divesh?
Thank you, Sam, and evening to you, Sam, and a very good evening to the listeners. My name is Divesh Motilal. Firstly, I'm a resident DJ of Cometsa. I'm a graduate of the Cometsa's digital online streaming mastery program, of which we are hosting a flavor of each of the modules so that our listeners can enjoy a piece of what the program Cometsa is offering to the public to develop their journey towards being online broadcasters. Um, as I said, my name is Divesh Motilal. I'm an engineer as well by trade. I've done a course in technology management. I've done a master's in renewable and sustainable energy, and I've recently done a master's in artificial intelligence. So, one of the things you mentioned, Sam, about holding the space, one of the key aspects, I believe, in terms of being able to be a successful host or anchor is to be able to do all the planning that we've mentioned in our previous shows, but also be adaptable as well as um, being in tune with what is happening on the day you're doing the broadcast. So for me, holding that space is about taking into consideration all the various modules that we spoke about in the previous shows and putting it into practice in real time. So, for example, if we talk about taking into consideration our listeners, we have to make sure that they are the number one priority for us in the show. And then comes our guest, as well as ourselves at the end. So there's a delicate balance in terms of how do you actually hold the space and make sure that you play the role that you have outlined right in the beginning when you were planning your space, where you were engaging with the guest of the show, as well as making sure that you are targeting your listeners with the message that you wanted to share with them. That's my sort of intro, Sam.
Mm. So you are saying that you don't just hold the space for the sake of holding the space, but you are holding the space in the interest of the listeners who are actually your priority number one, not really the guest.
Yes, even though the show is made for the consumption of the listener in mind, you select your guest based on what you have already decided your listeners would be interested in. They
Mm,
are indeed your number one priority. But that's a balance that you got to make sure that you guide the show, you motivate and inspire your listeners through conversation with your guest. And your
mm,
guest is indeed the expert in terms of the subject of choice that you have for your show, but you have to make sure that the messages that you want to give to your listeners, as well as the message that the guest gives to the listeners, is performed in the best way possible for the guest to be able to share his expert knowledge
mm,
and for our listeners to be able to consume the knowledge that they would like to hear, Sam.
mm, mm. And I assume that the criticality of it is that you should be enabling the guests to be at their best in bringing out the content that you are inviting, we have invited them for, and you are enabling them to address. So in other words, it could be very entertaining for you and the guest, but not at the point of or the expense of the listeners. So if the guest is happy with the space that you have created for them, but you don't think that is reaching the listeners, you have a duty to reorganize your conversation with the guest, even though the guest might be enjoying you.
Indeed, Sam. The aspect of holding the space. Yes, you've created this space for the guest who's a subject matter expert to convey a specific message to your listeners so that they can be inspired and motivated by the topic that you're having a conversation about. But
Mm.
holding the space is about enablement.
Yeah.
So you have to provide that platform and enable your guest. I'll give you an example as well, Sam. You could have an expert guest, but he might be unaware of his expertise. That's the ideal where you want to have an expert who's so good at what he knows that he
Yeah.
doesn't even know how good he is.
Yeah.
So by you holding the space, you need to also affirm your guest,
Mm.
to motivate your guest, to drive your guest in a particular direction so that he is the best he can be. And the message that our listeners get, which we also need to be cognizant of, in tune with, in terms of whether the conversation as it's transpiring on the line is actually reaching those listeners out there. Who is your number one priority, Sam?
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed. Indeed. And we talk about the having the framework in mind, which is the conceptualized approach to hosting shows by that channel, and the business model of that channel, because probably I assume that long before even you can host guests, there is a deep thinking about the framework that the channel follows, and the host and the anchors then are not having to recreate anything, but just to plug into that. So so that at the highest level of meeting the set standard, you are actually not creating anything new, but you are actually plugging yourself within a framework. And maybe we can talk a little bit about it. And I've just mentioned that framework, I guess, when I started the show. But how does it speak to you? The mind, I mean, sorry, the idea, which I is a slogan, but I regard it as a framework because it guides you the things that actually we address in our shows. How you personally, as the resident anchor and DJ, have you enjoyed following that framework, Divesh?
Thank you, Sam. Indeed, me as a person, Sam, I've had a lifelong journey thus far in terms of educating myself. I'm always curious, wanting to learn new and relevant and current technologies or areas of expertise, and what I would like to do with that experience and knowledge that I gain over the years is to use it to develop communities, to help our fellow man, to drive that knowledge into a organized sort of community so that they can also prosper, and in doing so have a positive impact on an individual as well as in a community to which those individuals belong. So the framework that Cometsa Global Online Channels follows, and it's also the premise of the digital online streaming mastery program of which I graduated from, is that of the idea where the I stands for informing and entertaining. So it must be information that entertains our audience. It must be informative to our audience. The D is standing for development and educate. So, once again, through education, we see that we can have a developmental agenda with individuals or communities
Mm,
looked at empowering as well as providing support. So, again, like this show today, in fact, the entire series that we're providing is aimed at giving that support to would be as well as existing broadcasters with all the do's and don'ts that we've been going through. And we want to empower them, which we hope would be able to uplift them to a higher level and be able to take their broadcasting and messaging to a point where the previous parts of the framework also gets empowered. And then lastly, the A in idea, we associate and network. So we want to get together and grow our community and hopefully have the members of the community to also take on the framework of the idea, Sam.
mm, mm. And I guess at the side of that is once we have created the content through the shows, then we make it available through our podcast, which then makes the content available for lifelong consumption.
Yes, Sam. Proof of the pudding is in the tasting. So
Yeah.
the knowledge and skills that I acquired through graduating from the digital online streaming mastery program, which Kumetsa offered, is entrenched in each one of the modules, and we've broken the program into sizable chunks who
Mm,
um, people who listen to us in the live shows, as well as the shows that they can download and consume at their leisure. We'll take them through all the little modules that we've identified. Some of them, they always sound easy, but when we start unpacking them,
yeah.
people can realize it's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah. Yeah. It is wonderful actually to be going through this program and unpacking it much deeper so that it doesn't really just become high level discussions, really going deep. I mean, we shared about the life story of Plato yesterday, and I'm just imagining how difficult it must have been then because they didn't have the technology platforms we have today. But there were people who, or there are people who went back and researched life of such influencers to a point where the material is so available to can learn from similar conversations that I guess we are having now, although we are not philosophers. Ours is more really imparting knowledge for people to apply. But they were just investigating and questioning things. Now, taking that fast forward, and actually today, as we are speaking now, reflecting also on the announcement by Amazon that they're going to be operating from South Africa. I'm just realizing how privileged we actually are to be living in today's times where now we don't have to struggle like people like Plato and them in terms of making our content available for lifelong. What is your reflection on that as a graduate of artificial intelligence on these few points that I've just listed?
Uh, Thanks, Sam, for that. For me, on a personal level, uh, the advent of technology, the ability to be able to access information, share information with the touch of a button, that's our reality now. Whether we are able to utilize that abilities to the betterment or to the worst sort of situation for ourselves, that is the $1 million question. When we talk of Plateau, there was a passion which they had. They wanted to learn, they wanted to educate, they wanted to share the knowledge. Even though they didn't have the tools that we have today, they used their passion and they were able to share those findings or expressions or philosophies which they developed, even scientific and astronology, astrology information with one another, and that is something we still need to do now. We have the opportunities, we have lots more tools, and technology is evolving at such a pace. However, if we don't have the passion, if we don't have the do's and the don'ts of what a potential student should use to guide them on the journey, they can easily go down the wrong path and utilize these technologies for the wrong thing. Now, if we look at the Cometsa Online Global Streaming Mastery Program and these modules which we are doing every Tuesday, this is exactly where it comes to the point that we are showing you the do's and the don'ts.
Mm.
We are giving you the guidance, and you can easily access this information, but you must be able to consume the information and utilize it in your own life to have that um, framework which we pass on to you, that of the idea to improve your own life and to improve those around you as well, Sam.
And there is we are intentional about it, Divesh, in the sense that I think we've learned a lot from many platforms in the past that it's not sufficient to be interested in the content. You have to be interested in the content being made available and how the content can be distributed. And of course, may I also say, in preserving the content for future generations to come. This is where I see the difference between us and those scholars of those years. And then I really feel become more motivated to say that we cannot not miss this opportunity. Almost like you can fast forward or imagine, visualize the future 100 years from now. How valuable this will become, because you can be guaranteed that it will be there and it will be available across the globe if you look at the direction that these technologies are taking. And that makes us truly the vessels of messages as we address it in this unit.
Yes, Sam. And when you look at AI, I foresee that, like I mentioned, the Cometsa's digital online streaming mastery program, you would find that the AI will actually pick those words up if we
Yeah.
were to search for some specific information. If we had visual a platform, if we were using a visual platform with our faces, the AI would be able to even trace our faces and then link that to all our messaging that we've done thus far, as well as all the future information that we will be passing on. That's the power of the technology where it is now. And the future can be only more exciting, but it can also be a bit scary, Sam.
Yeah, yeah. Can you imagine somebody coming across this unit? You and I are talking now. I'm saying in the future, and then after you listen to this, and then the AI says, "No, that's not the only thing the two gentlemen have spoken about." And then you have a whole series of units, let's say up to the last 40 unit, 40th unit, and almost making the your perspective freely available by just having clicked one particular unit or one weight that appeared, like let's say weight or senders like vessel of messages. I mean, that's power, isn't it?
Yes, Sam. And like we were saying, our reference point was Plato and his academy, which is deemed to be one of the first universities ever in the world, even though it got destroyed over time. In our case, um, we've got messaging that will sit on the internet and on devices and robots, and who knows what else might come into the future. Maybe even you'd have a smart fridge
Yeah,
that might use our previous show of affirmations.
yeah,
When you stand in front of the fridge in preparation of your dinner, and the camera on the fridge might actually pick up that the person standing in front of the fridge is not looking happy. It might start actually reciting some of our affirmations to pick
yeah,
up the spirits.
yeah. Man, that's very, very interesting. And we just want to be there to see how it evolves. Talk to me about this new concept that we have also created or developed as facilitators, hosts, and anchors, being a vessel of the message, not the message itself.
Well, it's a skill and an art to some degree, Sam. Um, you have to know what your role is, and that of an anchor. You must stay in your role. Sometimes it can be a bit difficult in that your guest may not be articulating a certain point very well, and you might be tempted to start changing your role and you start disseminating knowledge and information, which should actually come from your guest. You are there to, as you say, you the vessel of the messages. You must stay in your role, and you must be the one to sort of coach the
Mm,
conversation along,
mm,
so that you meet your principles of your framework firstly, and having your listeners and as your priority, but also to make sure that the conversation, if it's really going well and it's in line with the expectations of the listeners, to keep probing your guest so that
mm,
you can continue with that line of thought that that conversation is following, Sam.
mm. So if you magnify the messages and try to interpret what your guest is saying so that the listeners get a better understanding. You are not really defying the traditional concept of vessels. So our vessel is a little bit enhanced by saying you don't necessarily just become date vessel. You are actually alive to what these messages that you are relaying through the conversation is doing to your listeners. Am I right? Is that how you understood it as well?
Yes, Sam, and it's a skill which we show you the tools, but it takes practice, and you have to do self reflection as well with all the shows that you do as part of your learning journey, where you listen to your messaging you received from your guest, understand how that is being relayed back to your listeners, have a sense of what your listeners' expectations are. And if it's not in alignment, you have to quickly address those issues. And if there's blockages in the conversation, uh, you got to unlock them. You can amplify, edify, affirm, or ask clarification from your guest, and that helps you to develop and exhaust a conversation point before moving to your next point, especially when the point that's being discussed is really flowing and it's engaging, and through your senses it's really touching the nerve of your listeners in a positive way, Sam.
mm, mm, yeah, yeah. Now I'm enjoying these points because it's a way of reflecting on the content that we covered in 2020, and we are really now making it more practical. I mean, one of those is the ability using the Lakota methodology or principle of really allowing the conversation to fully exhaust the thought. You know, within the messages, you pick up the thought, and if you're not attentive and you're not fully present, or you are not skilled enough, you can miss very powerful thoughts that are coming or messages that are following the thoughts. I don't know whether between the messages and thought, what comes first, but a thought is, in my understanding, is what really leads to the messages. The messages needs to be unpacked to understand what thought informed these messages and what is the source of this thought. Why is this person using this angle? What perspective informs that person? That could be a lot at the same time that you need to be attentive to. But you saying that with practice, this becomes very easy, like you're driving a car if you are a well experienced driver.
Yes, with your skills that you acquire through a program such as Kumetsa Digital Online Streaming Mastery Program, and with the requisite experience, and as a graduate of the program, I was able to host my own show. I had to go through the whole value chain of developing a podcast or a video stream at the end. So it included listening and developing skills to listen from, and I agree with you, the thoughts precedes the messaging. The thought from the guest gets relayed to our listeners as we channel it to our listeners in the form of messages. And sometimes, like we mentioned earlier, our guest could be an expert who is unaware, and he might be sharing his thought in a format of messaging which is not necessarily at the same level of our listeners. So holding the space also entails massaging those messages, probing the guest so that you can get a better level of communication to get the messaging from our guest to the ears of our listeners
Mm,
through our skills that we acquire through these kinds of developmental programs. Huh?
mm, mm. Yeah, it's I sense the power of the mind there. Even though a guest is a subject matter expert, the power of their thinking can be made available and be accessed. And it becomes really, really very beautiful when you are able to engage with your guest to a point where they can go deeper and tell you what informs the perspective that is coming out through the messages, what thoughts and where are those thoughts originating. And it could become very deep. And this is exactly the holding of the space, I guess, because you can let your guests stay on the surface. That's still okay because it may be still teaching people or telling people things they didn't hear before. But when you dive deeper, it really reveals more about the guest than just the messages. And I guess we can use that as a measure of performance of you for you as a host. And that's an art, I guess.
Yes, indeed, it's an art. But something you're mentioning, Sam, that of a skill that you develop, that mindfulness that you as an anchor, you as a host needs to also develop. You need to be within your own self, but also be cognizant of your surroundings, especially as well on online radio or broadcast radio for that matter. You're not seeing the facial expressions of the guest. You're not seeing the audience as well. But you need to develop a sort of spider sense in a way. So it's a skill, but it gets developed into a higher level of sense that when the guest is speaking, you must be able to sense what kind of mood he is in, whether his state of mind is the same as the state of mind he had when you were practicing the show. But of course, when the show is live, you must be able to also sense the messaging that he's purveying and whether it's sufficient for what the audience is expecting. So, indeed, it's a skill, it's an art, but you get the tools which you need to then sharpen when you go through a process of having experience and also self reflection. Very important
Mm,
that when you do something, you go back and you reflect on it for yourself and go through the process and listen to your guest again once you've got your podcast to see whether you did the right thing or the wrong thing. So that skill gets honed over experience as well as the self reflection, Sam.
mm, mm. Yeah, indeed. We're very interested in seeing how we impact listeners or people in general through these conversations, like the philosophers have done. I mean, a lot of actions followed the ideas that they generated to a point where today we're talking academy and university, but if what we read is indeed the, the truth, that the university as we know it today originated from those philosophers' conversations. I'm wondering what our conversations are going to lead to in terms of actions in the future.
Well, there's all the old adage that a butterfly in Japan flutters its wings and you get a cyclone or a storm, maybe in Brazil. These little ripples that we are forming. Plato them we're obviously in a time and in a period where things like education, things like you know, having philosophies about what was in the center of the universe could get you killed.
Yeah.
And it was a different time and place, but they had passion. They influenced each other. They got together. They as friends they were able to build the ideas that they had and how they were going to share their content with other people. So likewise, theirs were sort of drastic, but because of the technologies and the platforms we have available now, what we're doing could also be a huge impact.
Mm,
It just takes a matter of striking the right chord, and the impact that we could have could also be as drastic and influential as that one as the impact that Plato and his friends had back in the days.
mm. And I'm intrigued by the fact that they chose to start the conversations with friends. Why do you think they have used that approach? They didn't worry about the rest of the world or the rest of the country or the region. They were just meeting in the garden as friends, and so at some stage Plato will have one student only.
It's about what I said earlier. It was about the passion, being able to pass on whatever knowledge or ideas to a friend. When you're in the beginning, you don't necessarily want to open up that kind of initiative. Like I was saying, back in those days, it was even dangerous to have certain thoughts,
Yeah.
gets you killed. But you're safer with friends. And when you bring the friends, you discuss our methodologies that you had mentioned as well in terms of Lokhotla. With a friendly environment, it's easier to pass knowledge over and give each person a chance to speak and also share their information that they may have, their thought, their messaging that they want to also share, and then debate amongst friends. You debate, you agree, you disagree, but at the end of the day, you still leave as friends. Well, most
Yeah.
of the time. For me, that is very important that you get into an environment where it's conducive, like the Kometsa's framework.
Mm.
It's conducive for growth. We are open. We are allowing people to join at their own free will, and we want to impart knowledge onto them. We want to discuss and hear from them.
Mm.
And like you said as well in a conversation with me earlier, Sam, um, even though we've graduated and we've formulated this program, every time we are sharing each module, we're still learning and evolving in ourselves, which is really fantastic. It's the space you want to be in where you can constantly be learning and you can constantly be in evolving and improving yourself, Sam.
Indeed. And in actual fact, I see us or I experience that we're learning even more so now that we have a point of reference, which is the 2020 course, where you didn't really have any foundational knowledge and you had not even practiced anything. And I'm sure if you think back then, and you observe yourself now, Divesh, you will agree with me that there's an absolute shift in even hearing and listening and sensing and feeling yourself as you have conversation like now, or as you anchor a show.
I fully agree with you, Sam. And likewise, the topics always seem sometimes you even think, no, but how am I going to fill a 1 hour show with this topic? It's too easy. But often what happens as we go through each of the modules, we find that we've got more to say and more points to discuss than time allows. And the experience I've gone through personally, Sam, lends me to also have a outside perspective that potential benefits of the program to people who are already in the broadcasting space, especially people who make these short messages and they tend to become viral and they become influencers, they still can learn from the do's and don'ts that the program offers. And the principles and the teachings that we have can only enhance and improve what they have to offer. And as influencers, they could actually really have that positive influence on society, Sam.
Mm, mm. As the one byproduct of what we are doing through this series is the terminologies that we are creating. I find ourselves taking generic terminologies and refining them, applying them to our series, and really get them getting much more refined meaning, but only in the context of what we do. And as we speak, I'm looking at the three sides. One is originality, the other one is the approach, that could be the methodology, and then context. I mean, context is a generic term, but here context for us is the digital online streaming as a anchor and as a host. So if the moment you say context, you're going to have to explain what is your context.
Yes, and if I can just touch on the originality aspect,
Mm,
um, our listeners would recall that in most of our previous modules, we always emphasize the importance of planning, pre-show, even from this level of having planned a script with your guest, giving him an idea of what he can expect in alignment with what the listeners would be expecting. The aspect of originality, your delivery of your messaging, your conversation that you would have with your guest has to be original. It has to be sounding natural. It can't be sounded as if you've scripted. And often you will have to measure as you're having the conversation with your guest what is working well, what isn't working well. So you will have to have that natural ability to be able to steer the conversation in one way or the other, especially in terms of what type of consumption that your listeners are obtaining, Sam.
mm,
Your approach that you mentioned, that as a host, as an anchor, um, you have to have your own guidelines in terms of how you will, attend to the conversation with your guest at that day. It's being broadcast live, and it has to be as natural as possible, that you are as a natural person, you're not an AI, for example. But even these days I see the AI is even made to sound and look as natural as possible. So the approach as well, the shows are not, I mean, in our context, the shows are not supposed to be interviews, but they are conversations, they are encounters, and they are inspired, like you mentioned, with regards to the Lakotla, where you give each person the respect they deserve. So even if you've got a co-host, if you've got one guest to more than one guest, you have to have that ability to facilitate the conversation, ask the relevant probing questions, um, redirect the conversation if need be, and and that's very important as a skill. We give you those tools, but it's a skill that you need to enhance as you go along, Sam.
mm, mm. Let's welcome Maynard. Maynard, welcome. We are in the middle of the show. I'm sure you will follow as we move on and jump in and make your contribution. Feel free to do so. Um, yeah, and then of course we have that framework within which we expect the anchors and the hosts to evolve. And I'm very, very curious to really observe the talents that are still hidden as they emerge. And I guess that once we are done with the series at the end of this year, uh, we will have to get to a point where now we want people to go and observe those who are hosting shows and mentor and coach, even as masters, if I may call ourselves by then, hosting demo shows. Because for me, the next level of attainment of expertise as the trainer participant is where we are really now showcasing our our specialization or our unique self in hosting or facilitating or mentoring somebody who's hosting the show. But do you think it's the right time for us and to start even going as far as noting down what we will call our own style, and maybe even, I mean, in coaching we have coaching models there. You are expected to come up with your own coaching model. I'm intrigued to say. I wonder if we get to that point where when Divesh is on the floor, we will know that this is the model or this is the approach he or she follows. He follows.
Well, Sam, in terms of our framework for Cometsa global online channels, that of the idea,
Yeah.
the shows obviously within that, and we've discussed this in previous shows, where you got to take into cognizance your actual channel that you are using to deliver your messaging and to host your show. The strategy there is really to integrate um, your guest and the messaging and the expertise that the guest is bringing into this framework,
Yeah.
and make sure that you use that framework in terms of your planning and delivery of the show itself, but that unique hosting style that you can develop from an individual within the confines of that framework. It's something that you will obviously develop over time as you grow, as you learn about yourself, as you learn from the shows you actually do develop. You would improve, and you will get to a point where you definitely will have your own unique style, but within the confines of that framework. Obviously, if you on another online channel, they might have a different framework. But
Yeah.
for me, the Gometso one is the that of the idea is the one that I will develop my own hosting
Mm,
style around them.
mm, mm. And then, of course, we can say the Lakota facilitation methodology then becomes almost like your guardian or your discipline that you adhere to, because that I think applies across the approaches. It could be called something somewhere else, but it's all about, and I think it brings me to the next topic. It's all about starting first with being a very good listener and attentive listener. And how does listening serve us when we engage with people generically, and how in the context of our shows have you found it quite helpful, or perhaps even a challenge to remember to apply good listenership, good listening skill?
I don't know if Maynard also wants to come in.
All right, good evening, Divesh. Good evening, that is yes, like I just came late, but indeed, in terms of the approach that we are taking as the anchors, we definitely need to follow some guidelines, and for us to enrich our listening skills is because maybe it helps us in a way that we host our shows in terms of like we in a way that we converse. It's more like a conversations. That's why it improves our listening skills because we engage according to the conversation that we are having. So we listen to the guest for us so that we can respond or to engage deeply into that particular conversation because we are not just hosting a show. We are more like a conversations, like in a
Mm,
Lahotla way, whereby we discuss the situation. And in if we are discussing something, you are listening for the person that you are discussing the conversation with. And in that way, it helps us improve our listening skills.
mm, mm.
And if I can add to that point, Sam,
Yes, Ivesh.
when we speak of generative listening, and we've mentioned this in our previous shows, um, we were speaking of that vibration that you want to attain with your guest, and that vibration being translated over to our listeners. And what
Mm,
we mean, as I can reiterate it in today's show, is we want to be in touch with our own emotions, our
mm,
feelings, and that gut
yeah.
sensation that you get. And likewise, you got to sense what your guest is feeling and make sure that everyone is vibrating at the same frequency so that your listeners can really enjoy the messaging that's being brought to them, and there's no sense of confusion. So that passion that you must try and develop within your show through that act of listening generatively, so it's not necessarily just listening with the ears, but sensing those vibrations and bringing that into our messaging so that we can really deliver content of high quality to our listeners. Yeah.
Mm. And even going as far as being at liberty to share with your guests and the listeners how you experiencing the emotions that are evoked by the conversations that you are holding. And I guess that's where then authenticity is really a practice, because you are actually a human being, you're not a machine, right, Maynard? That you are able to share with the listener and the guest the type of emotions that this conversation is bringing in you. And when you share that with listeners, you are saying it's okay for me to be vulnerable as a host, and allow my emotions to play without necessarily losing the role of holding the space.
Yes, not the same. As the host, you need to take control of the conversation and direct it where you want
Mm,
it to be. Like you definitely need to set the pace and the mood of the show.
mm, mm, Do you think it's an easy skill, diversion, Maynard, to really to identify the emotion? This is something that I've had to work on for a very, very long time to become skilled in. I found it that it's not an easy thing to be able to even know what kind of emotions you are experiencing. I don't know about you.
From my side, Sam, definitely not an easy skill. Even if you weren't even considering having a guest and trying to pick up on their own. Sometimes, as an individual, you have challenges knowing how you feel and how, what to do with those feelings. So, it's an art, it's a skill. It requires a lot of coaching, if I could put it that way, learning tools to be
Mm,
able to understand yourself fully, as well as then to extend those skill sets to another person. And in regards a guest, you definitely pick up with the pre-show planning. You have engagements with them, you research them, and you have a sense of where they are in terms of emotion when they live on the show, and you must be able to sense these emotions. And like you rightfully said, there's nothing wrong with uh, using affirmations, uh, being open and honest to say whether certain thing that was said by the guest invoked certain emotions with yourself, and to discuss that with the guests.
mm, mm. Yeah, it is indeed. I find us talking very loosely about people being emotionally intelligent, but really it means exactly that. It means being able to to understand, to be in connection, be connected with your own emotions and feelings, and also recognize that emotions and feelings that your partner is going through or other people are going through. And then, of course, being able to manage those emotions if they are destructive, right? And then if you are able to do that, that means you then become connected with fellow human beings. And then we say you're very good in managing your relationship with people. And I think, Maynard, you agree with me, you must have come across a situation where people are throwing these terms, but if you were to ask them, what do you understand by that? You'll find that actually it's just mimicking other people. It's not necessarily that people know what they're talking about.
Yeah, no, for sure. Emotional intelligence it's something that needs a character. It's not an easy thing to learn someone's emotions and to affirm them through those emotions that they can still do it. Like it's a hard thing to do, like because you need to understand the person deeply, and so that you can connect with their emotions and try to help them come out of those emotions and still be themselves. So it's a very hard thing, definitely, to maneuver around.
Should we first perhaps start by being interested in other people before even we try to check if we can even sense their emotions, or be interested in our own self? Because I guess you need to be fully present with self to be able to connect with your emotions, Divesh.
Yes, Sam, and it's a point that we discussed a little bit earlier, that before you can try to understand and sense your guest having, I mean, you can imagine we're saying that we must be able to sense what our audience is feeling, and the audience is a collective. But you do develop those skills where you know, after you've practiced, after you've acquired skills, what the audience will deem good or bad based on how the conversation is going with you and the guest. And of course, you can hone in on that skill. You can sharpen that skill by looking at your responses to your show post the live show. So looking at the podcasts, you can definitely improve on your ability to gauge and sense what emotions worked, what emotions didn't work. And of course, there's nothing wrong with not getting a response from the guest that you were expecting, but being able to deal with that unexpected response is the art as well, which you would also use in terms of holding the space, Sam.
Indeed, indeed. Wow. Um, Time is not on our side. Maybe you could think of the closing remarks, but as you do so, I want you to answer the question from me. What has got all this to do with being good at leading conversations?
Well, from my side, Sam, I also mentioned it a bit earlier. Having the skill sets that we would share from a Combat Search Digital Online streaming mastery program, you should be able to, together with gaining some experience and self-reflecting with the experiences that you do have, amplify, edify, affirm, and clarify your conversations that you have with your guest, hone in on those skills, and be able to have a link with the collective, which is your listeners, who are your number one priority. And being able to exhaust conversations, points that are really flowing and engaging from the perspective of not only the show, but all the way to your listeners, before being able to move on to your next point. So that to me is a skill. It's driven by tools that we would share with the students when they come onto a program like this, and with the practice that you gain, you keep improving on those ones, which really boils down to you delivering a better content, a better product at the end, Sam.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, so it's a very transformative and overall holistic development approach, and I hope we can really understand that is we're not looking at a technical mechanical approach to hosting shows, but we want to be able to plug all our being in it. Bernard?
Yes, yes, and that is yeah. Well, my closing remarks, even though I was a bit behind, but for you to lead a conversation, you need to take the listeners into heart. You
Yeah.
definitely your interest needs to be in the listeners, so that you need to upgrade their moods. You need to set the pace all the time. So yeah, for me, like that is the whole idea. Like, even though our idea for sure definitely it is to inform and entertain. So you still need to find a balance between the thin lines there, whether you are in a conversation, but you still need to entertain our listeners at the end of the day.
Mm. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I hope we have highlighted the key aspects of this unit, Unit 12, Conduct 7, leading the conversations. And what I hear us saying is that you have to work at yourself and allow yourself to be transformed, to be fully authentic as you hold the space as a host and anchor. I think that's the message that I'm getting. Uh, I want to close with the point I raised yesterday that if Plato could do it then, we can do it now and in the future. If Plato and his friends could do it in those years, imagine in today's world with so much resources and technology.